Hi, welcome back to Sustaining Creation, a faith journey for small groups. Now, by this point in time, after all we've covered, you might feel a little bit of despair. You might be feeling a little bit overwhelmed. You might even want to go back into bed and pull the covers over your head. You're probably questioning, with all that we've covered, if there's any hope for our kids and our grandkids' future. Well, welcome to the second half of our series. And we're going to show you, we're going to talk about why there's yet reason to hope. Even given all that we've talked about, there is yet still hope. So in this session, 3A, we're going to talk about the hope that arises out of the new technologies that are being discovered, as well as cooperation on an international level. We're going to talk about what's happening. But let's start with a little scripture. Probably the favorite one that feeds my ministry. It's a parable, of course. Jesus always wraps difficult truths in a parable. So let's go to the Gospel of Mark, 4th chapter. Jesus is telling this to his disciples. Listen, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seed fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Other seed fell on the rocky ground where it did not have much soil, and it sprang up quickly, since it had no depth of soil. And when the sun rose, it was scorched, and since it had no root, it withered away. Other seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it and yielded no grain. Other seed fell into good soil and brought forth grain, growing up and increasing, yielding 30, 60, and 100-fold. And he said, let anyone with ears listen. So it's too easy to fall into our despair, to be that seed that fell among the thorns or in the rocky ground. And yet God is calling us to be that seed that bears fruit. So we're going to look at technologies. We're going to go into some slides to show the amazing progress that's happening across the globe. New technologies that harness the sun and the wind and the waves and the heat that's in the earth. Technologies that are based on living with in harmony the way God created the earth and the universe. Wouldn't that be neat? So we're going to look at those technologies and why there's reason to hope. But we're also going to look at the international cooperation that's going to go on. So we're going to look at some time with the Paris Agreement and other agreements, and we're going to look at why this is basis for hope. So, wipe off those concerned frowns. Throw that blanket off your head. It's time to engage based on hope. It's time to be the seed that yields 60, 100-fold. Come on, we can do this. So we're talking about hope in times of, well, they just look desperate when you look at all the news, but we're talking about there's a reason for hope, and it's rooted in the new technology. Actually, the one thing that's been really stunning over the last couple of years is just how fast the new technology of renewable energy has developed. Every day, if you follow the news, every day there are new breakthroughs. Every day countries are making advancements. Every day we're seeing the change from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And the reason is because we finally come to the price point. We're breaking the price point where even if you don't count the cost of all the pollution, all the health, all the deaths that's caused by burning fossil fuels, even if you disregard those costs, renewable energy is now cheap enough to be competitive. When we harvest the sun and the wind and the water and the waves, renewable energy is now able to compete with coal, oil, and gas. And it doesn't cause the deaths, it doesn't cause the harm. And so if we look at the early predictions, they were off by an order of 10 or 100 as to how fast wind would come about, as to how fast solar would come about, as to how fast batteries would come about. That's where we're at right now. We're at a really exciting time. The technology is breaking through because we've broken that price curve. We've broken that price curve. And so we can go back and look at what were the predictions 10 years ago or 15 years ago and find out that we've exceeded them 10 times, 20 times, 40 times, 100 times. We're on the edge where no matter what politicians, no matter what fossil fuel interests are trying to hold us back, the renewable energy is going to happen. That should give us hope. It doesn't mean we have an easy road ahead of us. It doesn't mean that the fight isn't going to be hard, but that should give us hope. You know, there's a story in the book of Revelations in the 21st chapter where Jesus is proclaiming that, "See, I make all things new." Wouldn't it be something if this breaking through of the new technology at a time when we're drastically harming creation isn't part of God's Spirit at work in the world? Not just in informing scientists on what path to turn, but in calling us forward to support these efforts. See, I'm making all things new. To harvest the renewable energy that God created when He started out with a new creation that we never could understand until now. The fact that the winds are enough to power all our energy needs 40 times over. That the sun is enough to power all of our energy needs for a whole year in 1 hour. So 8,760 times more than what we need. And that's not even counting the water flow and the waves and the tidal pools and the geothermal, all those good things that we could be talking about. See, I'm making all things new. There's a reason to hope. There's a reason to pursue this with great urgency, because every day that we slow down means more people die, and the future for our grandchildren has become bleaker and bleaker. But it's time to act. We've got the technology. There's absolutely no reason we can't change to 100% renewable energy right now. All it takes is the political willpower. And political willpower, that's up to you and to I. We can do this.
I guess I'll emphasize again how important it is for religious communities to be actively involved in the work of democracy and the call to care for creation. If it's just up to the mainstream environmental groups, that is way too small a constituency to move the needle the way that we need to right now. And that's just from a practical standpoint. If we want to live in a future world that honors the greatness of our Creator, it's just never been more important for religious communities to speak up for what is.
But every time one of my daughters is out in the woods, she finds things. You know, she sticks her head in these flowers. She says, "Dad, come smell these," you know, and or "Dad, look at what I found." And she has a caterpillar, or even when we go fishing and she catches a fish and helps me take the hook back out and put it back in the water, or holding a frog and, "Dad, look at this, look at what we've got." And, you know, can we touch it? And they look at it, and it's just this wonderment. And it's beautiful because, you know, walking through the woods, I might be looking at my watch or cell phone, somebody calls, and I might be tempted to think about what it is that I got to do next. And they're always pulling me back to, "Right now, look, Dad, look, don't miss it." I mean, it makes me want to tear up. Yeah. Don't miss it, because it's all around you. And they always bring me back to it, and I think, wow, you know, this is how I want to see the world. They show me through the eyes of what I think God made us this wonderment to see, and they don't miss it, and they call me back to it, and that's a gift. I mean, that's a gift that I treasure, and so, but they see it, and so I think that's why I always think getting families, getting individuals, getting old people, get out into walking, rowing, cycling, whatever it is that you do to be out in the world that God has made and experience it, feel it, exert yourself in it.
We're in Washington, D.C., and as you can see, the scaffolds are still up from last week's president inauguration. And so we're here at the start of the new Congress and new administration. And it's a great time, especially with the news that we recently have seen, It's a great time to be talking about politics and the carbon bubble. Now, if you remember from previous, we talked about the carbon bubble. It's like all economic bubbles. An economic bubble requires everyone to believe that something has value until all of a sudden it doesn't. We call that point at where it doesn't the bubble popping. So in terms of carbon bubble, that's the fossil fuels. And right now, they still hold a lot of value, even though all the science is saying we can't keep burning this stuff. We're heating up the world. We're going to destroy the world. We can't keep burning this stuff. But as long as that's not the accepted business practice, as long as it's still believed that we can burn this stuff, then the carbon bubble exists and great amount of money can be made. And so that's what brings us into the politics. The politics of the thing is the fossil fuel companies, the oil companies, the gas companies, the coal companies, as well as the investment bankers have a lot of money invested in fossil fuels. In fact, if it goes along with the understanding that we can't burn it, if we were to say that right now, that'd be $25 trillion, 25 trillion with a T, wiped off the balance sheets for the oil companies, the coal companies, and the gas companies. That's what brings about the politics. With that much money at stake, there's a huge interest in delaying the point of where the bubble bursts. There's a huge interest in delaying that so more money can be made. Even though the oil companies have made more money than any company since the history of money, they want to make more. And so they hire lots and lots and lots of lobbyists. In fact, at this administration, they've managed to get oil people nominated as Secretary of Energy and as Secretary of the Interior and as Secretary of State and as head of the EPA. So they're trying to throw the edge of the carbon bubble back as far as is possible. But we know that last year in the Paris Climate Agreement, 196 countries agreed that climate change is real, it's human caused, it's happening now, and we got to stop it from happening now, which means that carbon bubble has to pop. So the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, who used to be the CEO of ExxonMobil, has a big interest in getting the sanctions lifted off of Russia, because the sanctions on Russia are preventing ExxonMobil from having the $500 billion deal they negotiated with Russia to go after the Arctic oil. And if they go after the Arctic oil, it's game over for the world. And the Secretary of the Interior is going to open up new lands and new waters for oil exploration. And the Secretary of Energy, that poor governor from Texas, he doesn't even realize it's more about nuclear than anything else. But the head of the EPA has already been put under sanctions to be quiet. They're not allowed to have a public presence. They've been told to shut down their climate science website. They've been told to cancel a conference on the climate change and the health. They've been told to stop issuing grants. Right now, as we speak, scientists are scurrying to grab the information from EPA and from NASA before that's wiped out, as the website was wiped out. So that's what we have. That's the intersection of politics and the carbon bubble. What are we to do about that? What are we to do about it? Well, the best thing that we could have done was vote so it didn't happen. But half of us stayed home. And then a quarter of the other half voted for the office that's now held. So now given this new administration, given all the sanctions against the EPA and the permission that he's just written to write to have 2 new oil pipelines, what are we to do? Well, what we're going to have to do is get involved. Politics for the sake of our children going forward is not a spectator sport. We have to be involved. We have to be active. How do we get active? We visit our local congressmen and senators' offices right in our hometown. And we find groups of people to come. And then we visit them here on Capitol Hill, where they're making the laws that approve new oil pipelines, where they're making the laws that strip away the power from the EPA. It's important that we show up here. And we don't have to show up by ourselves. We can show up with other groups. And so we can come and join forces with Creation Justice Ministries. We can come and join forces with the Citizens Climate Lobby. We can come and join forces with Earth Justice, with the Sierra Club, with every national environmental organization that is working desperately to save our world for our kids. But we need to come. The other thing we need to do is we can do it, and we need to set it in our daily calendar. We need to call. Calling the office of our representatives, calling the office of our senators is much more effective than sending emails. It's much more effective than signing petitions. We have to call. You need to put your senators and your representatives' office phone number in your speed dial. So every week you're calling them to express your concern that climate change is real. It's happening now, and the future of our kids is at stake. But whatever you do, we need to move away from despair. We need to embrace the hope that comes out of positive action. We need to get involved, and we need to do it now. Hi, in this session's where we're going to tap into the wisdom of writers, the author I'm going to quote is a fantastic individual. He's Wendell Berry. He's written unbelievable amount of books and poems because he's a farmer, but he's also a poet, and he's also a philosopher, and he's also a gray hair like me. He has a deep wisdom, and he has a folksy way of conveying it that many people might be receptive to hearing the difficult truth through his words. So let's spend some time with his words. The book I'm holding is Our Only World, which is a great book of essays from him, but the words I'm going to quote are from a number of his books and sources, so bear in mind I could be holding the wrong book for you right now. It's our generation that is witnessing the end of the era that we're involved in. My generation has done what no previous generation could do because they lack the technological power, and what no future generation will be able to do because the planet will never again be so beautiful or abundant. Our generation has destroyed the life systems of the planet because we had the technology to do it. Previous generations didn't have that technology. Future generations won't be able because they're going to be struggling to simply survive. Why? Because the planet will never again be so beautiful and abundant. Those are words that could make you cry. And he cites that since 1970, when I was 20 years old, 40% of the plants and animals, individual beings, not species, have vanished from the face of the earth. We need to open our eyes. And maybe it takes the words of word crafters to get us to open those eyes, to shed a tear for the pain that we have caused, to imagine a different way forward. One more passage. It's all a question of story. We're in trouble right now because we do not have a good story. We are in between stories. The old story, the account of how we fit into it, is no longer effective. Yet we have not learned the new story. The difficult truth is our old story. The story of how we were to master and dominate the earth and all that lived in it has led us to this point in time. We're in between stories now. We know that one doesn't work, but we have yet to embrace the new story. The story of how to live in relationship with all God's good creation, to care for it, not to destroy it. Powerful words from Wendell Berry. You get a chance, I really recommend you spend some time with him. Pick any one of his books. This is a great one, but there's a lot of others. Wendell Berry, a source of wisdom for our time. Ponder it. Pass it on. You know, we have this reluctance to change, particularly if we got gray hair. We have this reluctance to change. We like the old ways. And so one of the reasons we're hanging on to coal and oil and gas is because, well, it's brought us to this point in time. And if we don't know someone that's personally suffering from it, we'd want to know why we have to change. But that old technology, none of us would go back to. We wouldn't go back to having only dial radios or VHS tapes or typewriters. We wouldn't go back to those days where the only phone we had was hooked to a wall and it had a party phone on it. So when it suits us, we're willing to embrace new. But still we have this reluctance to change. We think the old ways are the only ways. You know, and there's stories in the Bible that address that. In the 10th chapter and 11th chapter of Acts, Peter goes on this amazing discovery of realizing that God is calling all people, not just his people, but all people. I don't know if you remember the story, but he has these visions about the animals coming down and God saying, eat, eat, and Peter saying, no, no. And God says, everything I've made is sacred. And that leads him to go and meet with a group of Gentiles and bring the faith to them. And when he gets back to Jerusalem, the rest of his colleagues gather around him and want to know why. How could you possibly go to those other people with the good news? How could you do it? And Peter's answer is very simple. Who am I to inhibit God? Who am I to inhibit God? Right now, the earth is changing to renewable energy. Countries across the globe are rapidly changing. They're outpacing the United States because we've decided to listen to the fossil fuel companies. Who are we to inhibit the future? Who are we to inhibit how God acts in this world? And so we've got a very basic decision to make. We can lead this revolution in renewable energy to a future that's safe for our kids and our grandkids. We can follow others who are leading the way, but at the minimum, we need to get the hell out of the way so that this happens. Who are we to inhibit how God would call the creation to respond to this crisis that we have made? So we need to decide. Lead, follow, but at any rate, get out of the way, because God's Spirit is awake and alive and calling the world to act to end this crisis. We can do this. You and I, we can do this. Next up is a Telling It Forward segment on a specific action item that we would like you to include in your discussion today. It's one of 6 that you should be discussing, but it's going to go deeper into this one to give you an idea on how the other 5 might also be looked at. Don't neglect the other 5, but for right now, sit back and take in the truth of this one. Let's take a couple moments and focus on a particular action item. You're going to look at all 6, but this one I want to call out to you because it's a little bit unusual. It's number 17, and what does it say? It says, skip the Christmas presents and use the money instead to help a poorer family save some energy this year through improving their home lighting or their home insulation or their weather stripping. Yeah, there might be some pushback from your family on that. We've been doing this for a number of years now. We started, my wife and I, just with ourselves, where we no longer gave material Christmas presents, but acts of love and acts of compassion. And then we rolled it out to our adult kids, and we told them that we were no longer going to give them Christmas presents, but we would do acts of service and love in their name. And we'd really appreciate it if they would do it the same in our name. And you'd be amazed after that initial pushback how they latch on that that's a good idea. Now, in true confession, my wife hasn't agreed to do this yet for the grandkids. So we've got another level to go yet. But there are biblical roots to doing this. This idea of giving away material presents and material wealth at Christmas has absolutely nothing to do with following the way of Jesus. I know that that's going to strike you as a horrible upset of the traditions we have, but there's biblical to it. Let's go back to Isaiah, the first chapter, the 17th verse. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Rescue the oppressed. Defend the orphan. Plead for the widow. That's what it means to follow the way of Jesus. To care for those, to be compassionate, to help reach those in poverty and lift them out. And what a better way to do it than in response to the climate crisis and the ever-escalating energy costs, we help people with energy-efficient lighting or improving their insulation or holding out the drafty winds of winter. Can you do that? Yeah, I think you can. And I think you'll find that your family will have a deeper meaning to Christmas than ever before. Because that's what God is calling us to be. A people rooted in compassion and love. So this Christmas, skip the presents. Don't even talk about Black Friday. Do something good. So that wraps up our video session for today. What's up next is for your discussion. That's every bit as important, if not more important, than all that we laid out before you. So gather together as a group. Spend some time with the scripture, but give yourself lots of time to dialogue about what you've seen and what you've heard, what has touched you, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. Take the time to listen very deeply to the wisdom each other shares. You never know when God is going to speak using another person's voice to give you a truth that you do not yet have. And then last but not least, in your discussion group, spend time with the 6 action items that we have in today's handout sheet. Until next time, enjoy the journey. I'm your host, Rev Dr. Terry Gallagher. See you further along the way.